So everybody seems to have a little bit of a different idea about how star ratings work or how they're supposed to work. And I just can't be bothered sitting there and explaining or justifying why I gave this book a 3-star and this book a 4-star and this book a 5-star every single time I do a book review. I think discussing things like character and plot are a lot better way for you to decide if a book is for you. And I feel like star ratings really lack nuance, so I don't tend to give them unless I'm going to actually put the review in Goodreads, which you can follow me on Goodreads if you like. I'll make sure that I put the information on the screen. So I tend to save them up over a couple months and then just rate them in bulk. But I think that I'm going to start doing it at the end of the year. So this is probably going to be a ridiculously long video, but I was going to make it anyway, so I may as well include the star ratings while I'm doing it. So this is how I rate books using star ratings on my accounts. Now, if you want to do yours a different way and you want to 5-star everything that you didn't absolutely hate, you just go right ahead. This is what I do on my account. You feel free to rate books how you want to on your account. So 1 star means I hated it. I found very few redeeming qualities in the book, and I've probably already found a way to get rid of my copy. 2 stars means I disliked it, but I don't want to set it on fire. It's not the worst thing I've ever read, but it's not good. 3 stars means it's average. It's typical of its genre. There's nothing particularly standout or memorable about it. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just somewhere in the middle. I tend to call these popcorn books. There's something that you sit down and consume all in one setting, and then you get up and you walk away and promptly forget everything that you read. And I understand that a lot of people interpret that sort of thing as a bad book, but to me it's not. Reading is supposed to be entertaining, it's supposed to be fun, it's supposed to keep you occupied and maybe pique your interest in something and maybe not. Not every book you read needs to be deep and meaningful and impactful in your life in the long-term way. It's okay for a book to just be entertaining for a few hours and then leave you space in your mental emotional capacity to move on to something else. 4 stars means I liked it, but that there were flaws that detracted from my enjoyment. This could be character problems or plot holes. Sometimes it's just that the book didn't get me as invested as I wanted it to, or didn't elicit an emotional response and I expected it to. It's a good book, it's just got some pretty serious flaws. 5 stars means I loved it. If it's got flaws, I don't care. They didn't detract from my enjoyment of the book. These are books that I'm actively encouraging other people to read, and it's not uncommon for me to buy a few copies and give them away to friends. Okay, so now we can go over each of the books themselves, and I've tried to rate them from lowest to highest, as close as I was able to. I tend to read pretty broadly, so it's kind of difficult when you're comparing apples and oranges, but I was going off of what I enjoyed the most and what really stuck with me versus what I enjoyed the least and what I would rather just forget that I read. Before we get into that, if you would please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, it really does help me out, so if you've already done that, thanks so much for taking the time. Okay, so my least favorite book of the year was Dead Skin Mask by Thomas Godfrey. I was really disappointed in this book. I read another book by the same author called All Hail the Carrion King, and I loved it. So when I found out that he had written another book, I was really looking forward to it. I'm a sucker for dark atmospheric themes, religious theming specifically, and I love the way that Thomas Godfrey uses language and the themes that he explores in his books. Dead Skin Mask was not it. It's about a grocery store clerk who thinks he's better than he is, and he hates the world and everyone in it, and then he starts kind of going on a spree killing, targeting homeless people, and then a coworker, and then eventually turning his rage onto himself. It's basically an entire novel of the rambling mind of a disenfranchised teenage boy. It reads very much like a teen shooter's manifesto, and I literally could find nothing I liked about it aside from the way that the author uses language. So I really like the way this author writes. I really actively disliked this book. The second 1-star review that I gave this year was for Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe by Melissa de la Cruz. This billed itself as a gender-bent retelling of Pride and Prejudice with holiday themes. It was picked up by Hallmark for one of its sort of classic Christmas tales, but The book's plot was so jumbled and the characters were so unlikable that the entire thing had to be scrapped and rewritten. Pretty much all of the characters and all of the plot points were completely replaced by Hallmark. Basically, the only thing they reused was the title and the main characters' names. Their personalities were completely different. What they do and the reason they're doing it is completely different. And that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the book. The book's main character, was obnoxious and utterly unlikable, but not in an intentional way. It's absolutely okay to write an unlikable protagonist, as long as you have some reason to tie into that character. This did not have that. It was just unpleasant. She was unpleasant. The story was unpleasant. And honestly, the end was at about the 2/3 point, and she just kept going for about another 100 pages. Okay, on to the 2 stars. My least favorite of the 2-star books that I read this year was Alliandre Rising by Daniel E. Myers. This is an epic fantasy with sort of medium stakes, with sort of allusions to a broader narrative that will be continued in other books where the whole world is at risk. The world building was great, which a lot of people are looking for in epic fantasy. I thought a lot of the cultural stuff that he put in was really well thought out, and I really enjoyed that part of it. It had sort of a D&D or tabletop RPG sort of feel, which was fun when it was working, but it wasn't always working. Sometimes I felt like the author sort of got bogged down DMing the game instead of telling the story in the novel. He went into excessive detail about things like clothes and food, and fight scenes were sort of blow by blow. And like I said, it felt very much like a DM sitting at a D&D table, and that's what you want, right? Like, you want them to set the scene, you want them to give you enough detail so that you know what to pick up on, so that you know how to respond to it. But novels are not tabletop RPGs, and they shouldn't be written like them. A lot of the characters are really excessively overpowered to the point that there's never any real risk that they're going to lose, which kind of takes away the stakes and makes it not fun for me. And there were just too many of them. There is a really broad cast of characters, and although I feel like the author did a pretty good job of making them all unique, the sheer volume of characters that you were supposed to remember and the details that you were supposed to remember about them made it a little overwhelming for me. The thing that bumped it from a 3-star down to a 2-star for me was the fact that it had no ending. We're in the middle of a big tournament, and the hero barely gets his opponent down on his knees, and then the horns sound, and the book just stops. There's no ending. There's no resolution to any of the open threads or the plot holes. There's no, like, okay, let's, like, pull this down sort of to, hit a crescendo and sort of pull it down and then tie a bow on it and stick a pin and place hold it for a little bit because we know we're going to continue it in the next book. Everything just sort of is left hanging, and I found that immensely dissatisfying. The next 2-star book I read this year was Murder House by James Patterson. This is a generic big city cop finds herself in a small town investigating a murder sort of thing. It takes all of the elements of a cop show and turns them up to 11. I found the suspense part of the book gripping, but the characters were completely unconvincing. They were doing things that just did not make sense. And a lot of the cop procedural elements were incorrect, like factually incorrect. That's just not how things work. To me, if you're going to write a cop procedural or you're going to write a suspense centered on cop procedure, you should probably get that part of the book right. This wasn't, and because of that, it broke the book for me. So Murder House is representative of its genre, but it's not a good representation of its genre. I'm going to talk about The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson in the 3-star category because that's sort of average for me, but I do want to note I chose not to rate this book because I am not the right audience for it. It's a self-help book. It's sort of fun and loose and very casual in the way that it uses language, but I found pretty much that as I was going through the book, I've already figured out all the stuff that it talks about on my own. I'm 41, so maybe it's an age thing, or maybe it's just the experiences that I've had in life. So this book was not helpful to me. It was just sort of telling me a bunch of stuff I already knew. If you are feeling unmoored, or you're finding a hard time finding like peace and joy in everyday life, largely because you feel like everybody around you is just doing a lot better and you feel less than because you're not doing as well as everyone else, this might be a good book for you. For me, I wasn't the right audience for it, so I didn't get a lot out of it, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad book, it just means that I wasn't the right audience. The next 3-star reads I did were Once Burned and then its sequel, Twice Tempted by Jeaniene Frost. These are paranormal romance books that feature Vlad the Impaler as the vampire love interest and Carney Tumbler who electrocutes people when she touches them, kind of rogue style. They're pretty representative of their genre. There's nothing wrong with them. They're fun and bizarre, but intentionally bizarre. They're ridiculous, but they know they're ridiculous. They're kind of popcorn books. You read them and then you set them down and you go on and do something else. And like I said before, there's nothing wrong with that. I had a good time, but they didn't really stick with me. Probably my most enjoyable 3-star read this year was A Court of Sugar and Spice. This is a spicy retelling of the Nutcracker Prince. It is a fae-born romantasy, sort of in the vein of a Sarah J. Maas book. 2 human sisters find themselves in the realm of fairy, chasing around these 2 studly fae beefcake men. One is the Prince of the Court of Delights, and the other is the literal sugar plum fairy. They go on a dangerous, sexually charged adventure to free the prince of the curse that has turned him into a giant nutcracker. And honestly, I had fun with this book. I had a good time. I'm just not a fan of really blunt, crass language in sex scenes. I prefer my erotica to be a little more subtle. But if you're into that sort of thing, or you just want to kind of go on a fun winter adventure and you don't mind a bit of explicit sexual description, this was a fun book. I had a good time with it. It's just not really my taste. The first 4-star read of the year was The Delicate Art of Death by Ryan McGinnis. This is a crime suspense drama featuring a disgraced FBI agent who's trying to root out a killer in small town Kansas. So again, we've got the big city cop in a small town trying to find a killer. But this is a much better execution of that theme than James Patterson's Murder House. It was a fun little novel that I devoured in an afternoon, and I was so invested in the story that I forgot to take notes, which tells you that I had a really good time. It was fast-paced, the writing was snappy, and I really enjoyed the main character. A lot of the time I find that when you're trying to write like a female lead in something where she's supposed to be sort of an action hero, she winds up being either like so emotional she can't function and then the men have to swoop in and save her, or she winds up being completely emotionless and an automaton. And this character is neither of those things. She is the right mix to me of badassery and broken. And that it really worked for me. I really liked the main character. I really liked the way she was written, and I'll probably pick up the sequels. The next 4-star read for me was Boom 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 by Ian Kirkpatrick. And in the vein of full disclosure, Ian and I are friends. They're known as Kirkpatrick here on YouTube. And while I like to think that my book reviews are objective and I try to keep things professional, I don't think it's fair to like rate your friend's book and not disclose that you're friends. So there you go. Boom 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 is a satire about a Ukrainian at-home chemist who posts videos of his explosions on YouTube and gets the attention of the US CIA. I thought the main character, Jan, was really fun. I liked his sort of sweet and hometown simple, but also somehow wise portrayal. And I really liked the goofy, over-the-top, intentionally over-the-top portrayal of the CIA agents. I feel like the timing of the release on Boom 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 did it a real disservice. It was released right around the time that Russia invaded Ukraine, and although it is not reviewing that information or touching on that at all, it was just a coincidence that the 2 things happened at the same time. I feel like it didn't really get the attention that it deserved, and that's kind of unfortunate because it's a lot of fun. Anyway, I enjoyed it, so if you like humor that isn't afraid to poke fun at something that people take really seriously, this might be for you. The next 4-star read for me was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was a cozy fantasy book about Viv, a retired mercenary who happens to be an orc, deciding to open a coffee shop in a place where nobody's ever heard of coffee. Like most cozy fantasies, this is a sort of microscope on characters. It goes through Viv setting up the coffee shop and sort of finding her people and learning how to problem solve without resorting to violence as the first thing. It's a nice way to spend an afternoon, especially if you can sort of curl up under a blanket with a hot cup of something to drink. So yeah, if you're looking for cozy fantasy or you just want something that's sort of fun and easy to read, this might be a book that you like. My next 4-star read was The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is a surprisingly tender, heartwarming love story about 2 people who are trapped in an awful situation and suffer terrible tragedy and loss. It's surprisingly uplifting given the situation that the character's in, because the book is not focused on the hardship. The book is focused on the tenacity of the human spirit, and I thought that that was really special. It's certainly not an easy read. If you're particularly sensitive to war or the things that the Nazis propagated in the 1940s, definitely don't read this one. But if you're willing, it's worth the read. The next 4-star read on my list is Overlondon by George Penney and Tony Johnson. This is a spoofy satire in the vein of Christopher Moore or Terry Pratchett. It's kind of Discworld meets steampunk, which sounds bizarre but was really fun. It's an action-adventure thing, almost a cozy fantasy, but the stakes are a little too high to be cozy fantasy. People do explode, but in a comical way. The humor really worked for me, so if you like Terry Pratchett's sort of like sly, sideways commentary, overlaid with a bunch of ridiculous, over-the-top, and intentionally ridiculous humor, this might be the book for you. The next 4-star read on my list is That Night by Chevy Stevens. This is a suspense novel about a woman named Tony who has spent the last 17 years of her life behind bars. She was 18 when she was convicted wrongfully of murdering her sister. So half of her life has been spent in prison, and we join Tony just as she's getting out, and she has to sort of try to make a life for herself in a place where everybody thinks she's a murderer. Unfortunately, things from the night her sister was killed keep coming up from her past and getting in the way of her finding any measure of happiness. One thing I found really interesting about this book was they tell you right up front who's responsible for the murder, and you spend the rest of the book trying to figure out what happened and why. That storytelling vein, where it's sort of hopping back and forth between the night that the sister was killed and Tony's current day, and then there's sort of interspersed chapters where she's sort of surviving prison and learning how to cope as an 18-year-old, and then growing into a woman in this horrible environment. That really worked for me. I thought the character was interesting and engaging. She's not perfect, and that's great. Anyway, That Night really worked for me, and I really liked it. The next 4-star read on my list is Verity by Colleen Hoover, and I know that Coho is very popular to bag on, but I really enjoyed this book. It's sort of a suspense novel with an overtone of eroticism because it's a Colleen Hoover book. It's about an author who gets tapped to finish a series by a famous author called Verity because Verity got in a car accident and is no longer able to write. So the author is staying at Verity's house with her husband and her young son while she's researching and going through all of Verity's notes about this book that she's going to write or the next book in the series. And Verity is supposed to be vegetative. The author finds an autobiography by Verity where she's sort of, talking about her life and all of the things that she's been through. And the longer this author reads, the more horrible things Verity has done to the people around her, sort of in order to maintain control. And it just sort of goes over what an awful person Verity is. And the author is kind of contemplating, like, should I tell the husband? Should I not? Should I let him keep his wife's memory? She's never going to wake up. She's never going to be a normal person. They're never going to have their life back. What good can come of this? And then really weird things start happening in the house. Stuff moves, she hears noises, she gets locked in a room and everybody else is supposed to be asleep. And she starts to sort of think that, maybe Verity isn't really what she appears to be. It's all very trippy and sort of up in the air. You start to kind of question what's real and what's not, and is this the author's overactive imagination, or is this woman really a threat to her? The book ends on a cliffhanger, which a lot of people didn't like, but I thought was the perfect ending for the book. So despite Colleen Hoover being on the naughty list for basically all of Book Talk and BookTube, I really liked this book. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I had a good time with it. The first 5-star book on my list is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. This was a buddy read that I did with Kirkpatrick, and it was a hard read. It's about the life of a man who struggles to understand the people around him, he struggles to interact with the people around him, and he winds up just sort of tearing his life apart after a series of really bad decisions. The best description for this book is an exquisite exploration of loneliness. It was poignant and moving and sad in a stick-to-your-rib sort of way. It's been months since I read this, and I still think about it often. It comes back to me when I'm feeling a little melancholy or sort of outside or other. I was always really shy growing up, so this book kind of spoke to me and pulled on those emotions a little more than I'm used to books getting to me, which is a good thing. Any book that can make you feel things, in my opinion, is a good book. The next 5-star read for me was a romantasy book called The Wolf and the Hawk. I absolutely loved this book. It is a slow burn romance with medium to medium high stakes. I found the characters engaging. I loved the way that friendship was portrayed. I really enjoyed the way that the romance sort of was slowly woven together. They weren't in a super hurry to like get to the erotic bits and jump into bed with each other. The point was the interaction between the two characters, and that really worked for me. Just the way that the characters had to sort of make room for each other and make allowances in their lives for each other and sort of make themselves vulnerable in order to come together in the end. It really worked for me. I really like the way that this author writes romance. The characters are open and communicative, and it's all very heartwarming. The conflict that's there is engaging and believable. And yeah, so it hit every note for me. I loved The Wolf and the Hawk. The last book on my 5-star list was Bringer of Light by Frank W. Janus, and this was probably my favorite book of the year. No, yeah, it definitely was my favorite book of the year. It's labeled as a scientific romance, but if I were going to classify it, I'd probably call it soft sci-fi with some political commentary and some modern day commentary. And that sounds really weird. It's sort of H.G. Wells meets Jules Verne meets Ayn Rand. And again, that sounds like a bizarre combination, but it really works for this book. It explores the concept of what it means to be human through creative expression and decision-making, and what it means to sort of give up those things to artificial intelligence. The author's ability to foreshadow and then reward you for figuring things out before the reveal was really masterfully done, and that made it a really satisfying read. It's not perfect. There are definitely some things in there that I felt could have been explained better. There's some stilted dialogue here and there, but the way the book made me feel overrode any flaws that I found within the prose. I feel like it's very timely with the way that ChatGPT and generative AI are sort of in the community zeitgeist at the moment, and the way that we're all sort of thinking about it and talking about it and like, where are the boundaries? Where is this okay and where is it not? It's a very timely book, but I think it would stand out on its own even without that being the case. It sort of sits and makes you think about like, okay, so what if we do create AI in such a way that it's able to solve all of our problems? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for human beings when we no longer have to problem solve? You know, what does that mean for our creativity? What does that mean for our survivability? What does that mean for our development as a species going forward? And I thought that the thought-provoking exercises that it sort of teased out of your mind as you were reading were really interesting. And because I had all of those thoughts, it made me feel a bunch of stuff. And any book that makes you feel this intensely while you're reading it, and then even after you've closed it, like I still think about this book all the time. I talk about it all the time. And it was just really great, and I really enjoyed it, and I cannot speak highly enough about it. So those were the books I read in 2023, some good, some bad. And again, just because a book doesn't work for me, doesn't mean that it won't work for you. So if you want to check out the full reviews on any of the books that I've talked about, I will make sure to link them down in the description. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this year. I have had a great time, and I'll see you in the new year. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And of course, if you like the way that I present information, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below. You can find all of my social media contacts in the description. And of course, if you want to keep up with me and the progress I'm making on my current novel, you can do that at effywritesbooks.com. Thank you so much for watching. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you next time.